The plea escaped her lips before she could stop it, thin and trembling, cutting through the sterile brightness of the room like a crack in glass. She was a woman who had stood in front of global investors without blinking, who had signed contracts that decided the fate of thousands, who had never once asked anyone for mercy. And yet there she was, shaking, begging a man who looked as emotionally frozen as winter, asking him not to make her undress. The world knew her as a fearless CEO, but in that moment, she was simply a terrified human being, cornered by circumstances she could not control, staring into the steady eyes of a single father who had no choice but to do what had to be done. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in stories that remind us how human we all are beneath our titles, please take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel, Kindness Story. Your support helps us bring more emotional, meaningful stories like this to life. Her name was Maribel Quince, and for most of her life, she had been taught that vulnerability was weakness. She had grown up in a world of power, pressure, and polished smiles, learning early that tears made people uncomfortable and fear made them doubt you. She climbed every ladder placed before her, step by step, never looking down, never pausing long enough to feel. By 35, she was the youngest CEO of a multinational firm, admired, envied, whispered about. Her schedule was relentless, her life carefully curated. What no one knew was how alone she felt inside all that success, how her penthouse echoed with silence, how every award felt colder than the last. She had trained herself to need no one, and now, in the cruel irony of life, she needed someone more than ever. Rowan Hale had never wanted to be cold. He had simply learned that warmth invited pain. At 38, he carried exhaustion in his bones and responsibility in his eyes. A single father to a 7-year-old daughter, he had lost his wife in a sudden accident that left him hollowed out, unsure how to breathe without her. Since then, he had become a man of rules, routines, and emotional walls. He worked as an emergency response supervisor, overseeing safety protocols, medical containment, and disaster control. His job demanded clarity, not compassion, and he had learned to switch off the parts of himself that used to feel too much. Love, he believed, was a luxury he could no longer afford. His daughter needed stability, not a father who broke every time he remembered what he had lost. Their worlds collided on a bright daytime morning when a minor but dangerous chemical leak occurred in one of Maribel's corporate research facilities. It wasn't the kind that made headlines, but it was the kind that required immediate isolation and decontamination for anyone exposed. Maribel had insisted on being present, as she always did, believing leadership meant showing up. What she hadn't anticipated was being caught in the wrong corridor at the wrong time. By the time emergency teams arrived, she was already inside the containment zone. Rowan was the one assigned to supervise the decontamination process. He saw her first as a name on a tablet, then as a woman standing under harsh lights, wrapped in a temporary thermal blanket, her eyes wide and confused. He recognized her immediately, not as a celebrity, but as someone who looked like she was about to shatter. The protocol was simple, clinical, unavoidable. Contaminated clothing had to be removed, skin washed, hair treated, everything neutralized. It was routine to him, but to her it felt like humiliation, exposure, loss of dignity. She pleaded, not dramatically, not loudly, but with a rawness that unsettled him. She tried to negotiate, to reason, to delay. She spoke of her position, her influence, her reputation, but none of it mattered inside that room. For the first time in her life, her power meant nothing. She was just another human at risk, and he was just another man with a duty. Rowan did not enjoy his role. He did not take pleasure in authority. He simply followed rules because rules were predictable, and predictability was the only thing that had kept him from falling apart after his wife's death. He explained the process calmly, professionally, without emotion, and the more calm he was, the more it frightened her. His stillness felt like indifference, like he did not see her as a person, only as a problem to be solved. Inside Marable, something broke open. She was not afraid of undressing. She was afraid of being seen when she had no armor left. Her tailored suits were not just fashion. They were shields. Her confidence was a costume. Without them, she felt like a child again, small and unprotected. She had spent her entire life building walls so no one could see how fragile she really was. What Rowan didn't know was that Marable had been emotionally stripped long before that day. Years of pressure, loneliness, and performance had worn her down. She had no one to call when she was scared, no one to hold her hand, no one to tell her it would be okay. And now, in this sterile room, surrounded by strangers, she felt more alone than she ever had. Rowan saw something in her eyes that he recognized. It wasn't arrogance, it wasn't entitlement, it was panic. The same kind he had felt when his wife was rushed into surgery and he was told to wait. The same kind he had felt holding his newborn daughter, terrified he would fail her. For the first time in years, his emotional walls cracked. He did what he was trained not to do. He slowed down. He adjusted the process. He gave her space. He spoke to her not as a CEO, not as a subject, but as a person who was scared. He explained each step, not with technical terms, but with patience. He looked away when he could. He shielded her from unnecessary exposure. He treated her dignity as something worth protecting, and that changed everything. For Marable, this was the first time in years someone had cared about her comfort more than her status. No one had ever asked if she was okay. They asked if she was ready for the next meeting, the next deal, the next speech. Rowan did none of that. He simply stayed present. Their interaction did not end that day. A minor complication in her results required a follow-up observation. She remained under supervised care for a few hours. Rowan, as protocol, stayed nearby. They didn't talk much at first, but silence has a way of making space for truth. Marable began to realize how tired she was of being strong, how heavy it was to always be in control. She saw something in Rowan too, a man who had chosen numbness because feeling had once hurt too much. She could sense the grief in him, even though he never mentioned it. Some people carry sorrow like a shadow. Over time, their guardedness softened, not through dramatic confessions, but through shared quiet moments, through small gestures, through understanding without explanation. Marable began to see that strength did not have to mean isolation. Rowan began to see that care did not have to lead to loss. When Marable finally left the facility, she expected to return to her old life unchanged, but she couldn't. Something inside her had shifted. For the first time, she questioned the pace she was running at. She began leaving the office earlier. She began walking instead of being driven. She began noticing people. Rowan, too, found himself changed. He found himself smiling more at his daughter, listening more, letting her see him laugh. He realized that he had been protecting her by being distant, but what she needed was presence, not perfection. They crossed paths again weeks later, accidentally, at a small daytime community park. Marable recognized him instantly. He was with his daughter, helping her with homework under a tree. The scene was simple, ordinary, and yet it felt like something out of a movie to her. She realized how much she craved ordinary. They didn't make a big deal of seeing each other. They simply shared the bench, talked about small things, weather, schedules, coffee preferences, but beneath it all, something deeper was happening. They were learning how to be human together. Marable began to understand that asking for help did not make her weak. Rowan began to understand that opening up did not make him irresponsible. They were both unlearning survival patterns that no longer served them. The biggest challenge they faced was themselves. Marable struggled to slow down. Rowan struggled to feel. She was afraid of losing control. He was afraid of attachment. But slowly, gently, they began to meet in the middle. Marable visited Rowan's modest home one afternoon. She sat on the floor playing with his daughter, something she never imagined doing. She laughed without worrying how it sounded. She forgot who she was supposed to be. For the first time, she felt real. Rowan saw her not as a CEO, but as a woman who had never been allowed to rest. He saw how she watched his daughter with wonder, as if discovering a world she had missed. He realized that sometimes people weren't cold. They were just lonely. When Maribel faced a massive corporate scandal months later, she almost reverted to her old ways: isolation, control, silence. But this time she reached out. She didn't ask Rowan for solutions. She asked him to sit with her, and he did. If this story is touching your heart, if it reminds you of your own struggles, your own second chances, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Story. Your engagement helps us continue telling stories that matter. Maribel learned that dignity was not something others could take from her. It was something she could protect within herself. Rowan learned that care did not have to mean pain. Sometimes it meant healing. They didn't fall into love dramatically. They grew into it, slowly, carefully, honestly. They became each other's safe place. And sometimes, the most powerful transformations don't come from success or failure, but from moments when we are stripped of our armor and finally seen. Before the ending, we have a special request. Please comment what this story made you feel and share it with someone who believes in kindness and second chances. Because in a world that often teaches us to hide, sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let someone see us and stay.